My mama used to say, never argue with someone who believes their own lies. But sometimes, Representative, you have to make an exception, especially when those lies are costing the American taxpayer millions of dollars. Vice President J.D. Vance sat perfectly still in the presiding officer's chair, his marine posture unchanged despite the chaos erupting around him. The Senate chamber had never seen anything quite like this. A joint oversight hearing on immigration policy that was about to become the most watched political moment of the decade. Representative Ilhan Omar stood at the witness podium, her finger jabbing toward Vance like a weapon. She had arrived expecting a routine appearance, an opportunity to denounce Republican immigration policies and generate clips for her social media feeds. What she got instead was an ambush she never saw coming. You sit there in your fancy suit, Mr. Vice President, pretending to care about immigrants. Omar had begun, her voice dripping with contempt. But we all know what you really are. You're a white nationalist sympathizer who built his career attacking people who look like me. You wrote a whole book blaming poor people for their own poverty, while you climbed the ladder and pulled it up behind you. The gallery had stirred at her words. This was the Ilhan Omar her supporters loved. Fierce, unapologetic, ready to speak truth to power. She was just getting started. You attack refugees. You attack Muslims. You attack anyone who doesn't fit your vision of what an American should look like. She paused for effect, looking directly into the C-SPAN cameras. And now you have the audacity to chair a hearing on immigration. The hypocrisy is stunning, but not surprising. Throughout her tirade, Vance had done something that clearly unnerved her. He didn't react, didn't interrupt, didn't defend himself. He simply sat there occasionally jotting notes on a legal pad, his expression neutral, almost bored. It was the same technique he'd learned interrogating detainees in Iraq. Let them talk. Let them commit. Let them hang themselves with their own words. When Omar finally paused, apparently expecting him to take the bait, Vance looked up from his notes with an expression of mild curiosity. "Are you finished, Representative?" The question, delivered in his soft Appalachian drawl, seemed to throw her off balance. She had expected anger, defensiveness, perhaps a shouting match that would make her look like a warrior against oppression. Instead, she got this: calm, measured, almost sympathetic. Yes, I've made my point," she said, suddenly uncertain. "Good." Vance set down his pen and folded his hands. "Because I'd like to talk about your finances." The color drained from Omar's face. What followed would become known as the meltdown on C-SPAN. 47 minutes that ended a political career and launched 1,000 memes. Vance reached for a folder on his desk, moving with the deliberate patience of a man who knew exactly where this was going. He opened it slowly, almost casually, as if reviewing a restaurant menu. "Before we discuss immigration policy," he began, "I want to congratulate you on your successful small business, Representative Omar. Truly, the American dream in action." Omar's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" "The E Street Group." Vance looked up with an expression of exaggerated admiration. "Your husband's consulting firm. Remarkable growth over the past few years. Really remarkable." "My husband is a professional political consultant. There's nothing unusual about—" $2.8 million. Vance held up a document. "That's how much your campaign has paid to your husband's company since 2019. $2.8 million in consulting fees, travel expenses, and various other services." He let the number hang in the air before continuing. "Now, I'm just a hillbilly from Ohio, Representative. I didn't go to fancy schools. Well, I went to Yale, but I was on scholarship. and everyone there reminded me I didn't belong. A few chuckles from the gallery. But even I know that $2.8 million is a lot of consulting. Omar straightened in her chair, her jaw tightening. Tim Minette is a respected professional in his field. He worked on campaigns long before he met me. This is a racist attack on my family, and I won't. Racist? Vance's eyebrows rose slightly. Representative, I haven't mentioned your race. I haven't mentioned your religion. I've mentioned a dollar amount and a company name. Those are just numbers and words. Unless numbers are racist now. You know exactly what you're doing, Omar shot back. You're trying to delegitimize me because I'm a black Muslim woman who... I'm trying to understand why your campaign paid your husband's company over $100,000 a month. That seems like a reasonable question for a public servant to answer. Vance pulled out another document. Here's what's interesting about the timeline. Tim Minette was married to someone else when he started working for your campaign. Then there were reports of an affair. Then his wife filed for divorce, citing his relationship with you. Then you married him. And then... Vance traced his finger down the page. The payments to his company increased by 400%. The chamber had gone silent. Even Omar's allies on the Democratic side seemed to be holding their breath. Now I'm not a marriage counselor, Vance continued, his tone almost gentle. What happens between consenting adults is their business. But when campaign funds, money donated by everyday Americans who believed in your message, when that money flows to your spouse's company at rates that would make a Wall Street banker blush, that's everybody's business. Omar was gripping the edges of the podium now. The FEC has reviewed our filings. Everything is legal and transparent. Legal and transparent. Vance nodded slowly. You know, where I come from in Middletown, Ohio, we had a saying. Just because something's legal doesn't mean it's right. Lots of things are legal that would make your grandmother ashamed of you. He closed the folder with a soft snap. Representative Omar, where I come from, when you pay your spouse millions of dollars from your campaign fund, we don't call that consulting. We call it what it is. And the FEC has a different word for it, too. They just haven't used it yet. Omar opened her mouth to respond, but Vance was already reaching for another folder. But let's move on. I'd like to discuss a historical event, something that happened in 2001. I'm sure you remember it, though perhaps differently than most Americans do. If you want to see what happened when he brought up September 11th, subscribe now. The second folder was thicker than the first. Vance handled it with a certain reverence, as if it contained something precious or painful. September 11th, 2001, he began. I was 17 years old, living with my grandmother, my mama, in a house that didn't always have running water. We watched the towers fall on a television set that got 3 channels on a good day. His voice had changed, softer now, but with an edge of steel beneath the softness. 2 weeks later, I walked into a Marine Corps recruiting office. I wasn't the only one. Thousands of young men and women from towns like mine, from families like mine. We all had the same thought. Someone attacked our country, and we were going to do something about it. He looked up at Omar. I served in Iraq. I had friends who never came home. I had friends who came home in boxes. I had friends who came home but left pieces of themselves in the sand. Pieces they'll never get back. Omar shifted uncomfortably. She could see where this was going, but there was nowhere to hide. So, imagine my interest, Representative. When I heard your remarks at the Council on American-Islamic Relations banquet in 2019, Vance pulled out a transcript. You were discussing the aftermath of September 11th, the discrimination faced by Muslim Americans. A legitimate topic, an important topic. And then you said this. He read directly from the page, his voice flat. CAIR was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. Vance set down the paper. Some people did something. He let the words sit in the silence. Representative Omar, I need you to help me understand something. Because where I come from, words matter. When we talk about Pearl Harbor, we don't say, some people did something. When we talk about Oklahoma City, we don't say, some people did something. But when it comes to the deadliest terrorist attack in American history, an attack carried out by Islamic extremists who murdered 2,977 innocent people, mothers, fathers, children, first responders running into buildings they knew might collapse. When it comes to that, you chose the words, some people did something. You're taking me out of context. Omar's voice rose sharply. I was making a point about civil liberties, about how Muslim Americans were... I'm reading your exact words, Representative. There is no context that makes some people did something an appropriate description of September 11th. Vance leaned forward. Unless you believe it was something less than what it was. Unless you believe those 3,000 Americans were what? Acceptable losses? Collateral damage in some larger geopolitical grievance? That's disgusting, Omar was shouting. Now you're twisting my words to paint me as a terrorist sympathizer. This is Islamophobia, pure and simple. I haven't mentioned Islam, Representative. I've quoted your words about a terrorist attack. Vance's voice remained calm, which only seemed to infuriate her more. You're the one who keeps bringing up your religion, almost as if you want to hide behind it whenever someone asks you a difficult question. I've received death threats because of people like you. Omar jabbed her finger at him. People who use their platforms to spread hatred against Muslims. You have blood on your hands. Vance waited for her to finish, then spoke quietly. I lost friends because of what happened on September 11th. Real friends with real names who will never come home to their families. And you reduced their sacrifice and the sacrifice of the people who died in those towers to some people did something. He gathered the transcript back into the folder. In the Marines, we have a saying, never forget. It's not just words to us. It's a promise we made to the people we lost. You apparently have a different motto, Representative, and I think the American people deserve to know what it is. Omar was breathing heavily now, her composure cracking, but Vance was already reaching for the next folder. But wait, I'd like to discuss some of your thoughts on Israel and American Jews. I have some tweets here I think the audience will find illuminating. Share this with someone who needs to see what came next. Vance pulled out his phone with an almost theatrical casualness. I don't usually bring props to Senate hearings, he said, scrolling through the screen. But I thought it might be useful to read directly from the source. Wouldn't want anyone to accuse me of taking things out of context again. Omar's face had hardened into a mask of controlled fury. She knew what was coming. Everyone in the chamber knew what was coming. February 10th, 2019, Vance read from the screen. A journalist asked you what you thought was behind Republican support for Israel, and you responded publicly on Twitter for the whole world to see with these words. He held up the phone as if presenting evidence to a jury. It's all about the Benjamin's baby. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Now, for those who might not be familiar with the reference, Benjamin's is slang for $100 bills because Benjamin Franklin's face is on them. So, when asked about support for Israel, your first instinct was to invoke the image of money, Jewish money specifically, given the context. I apologized for that tweet, Omar said quickly. My Democratic colleagues explained why it was hurtful, and You apologized. Yes, let's talk about your apologies. Vance set down the phone and picked up another document. Because here's what's interesting about your pattern, Representative. You make an anti-Semitic statement. People get upset. You apologize. And then you do it again. He began reading from the timeline. 2012. You tweeted that Israel has hypnotized the world. May Allah awaken the people and help them see the evil doings of Israel. The hypnotizing Jew. That's a trope that goes back centuries. Representative, it was a favorite of Nazi propaganda. I was criticizing Israeli government policy, not 2019. All about the Benjamins, the money-grubbing Jew controlling politicians. Another classic. That's not 2019 again. You questioned whether American Jews have dual loyalty to Israel. The dual loyalty canard. Another anti-Semitic greatest hit. The Nazis loved that one, too. You're comparing me to Nazis. Omar's voice cracked with outrage. I am a refugee. I fled persecution. How dare you? I'm comparing your words to historical anti-Semitic tropes, Representative. The comparison makes itself. Vance held up a hand to stop her interruption. But here's the part that really interests me. After each incident, you apologized. Your party leadership issued statements condemning anti-Semitism. The House passed a resolution specifically prompted by your remarks. He leaned back in his chair. And then you kept doing it over and over. Apology, repeat, apology, repeat. You know what my mama would call someone who keeps apologizing for the same thing? He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried across the silent chamber. She'd say, that person ain't sorry. They're just sorry they got caught. Omar was on her feet now, her finger pointing at Vance like a weapon. This is a coordinated attack, she shouted. You and your white nationalist allies are trying to silence a black Muslim woman because I dare to criticize Israel. I will not be intimidated. I will not be silenced. Representative, please sit down, Vance said calmly. You're not being silenced. You're being quoted. There's a difference. You sit there in your position of privilege, lecturing me about anti-Semitism when your own party. My grandmother survived poverty that would break most people. My mother battled addiction while I raised myself. I served my country in a war zone while you were tweeting anti-Semitic conspiracies. Vance's voice remained steady, but there was ice in it now. Don't lecture me about privilege, Representative. I earned everything I have. The question is whether you can say the same. He closed the folder. But we're not done yet. I'd like to discuss your immigration story, the refugee narrative you've built your entire political career on, because I have some questions that you've never actually answered. Like and share if you think the next part changed everything. The chamber had gone completely silent. Even the usual background murmur of aides and whispered conversations had ceased. Everyone could sense that something fundamental had shifted. Vance's tone changed. The folksy warmth, the occasional humor, all of it drained away, replaced by something harder. This was no longer a debate. It was a reckoning. Representative Omar, you've built your political identity on a powerful story. A refugee from Somalia who came to America, lived in a refugee camp, achieved the American dream, and now serves in Congress. It's a beautiful story, the kind of story that makes this country special. He paused. If it's true? Omar's face went pale. In 2009, you married Ahmed Hirsi in what you've described as a Muslim ceremony, a faith tradition marriage, not a legal one. You had 2 children together. Then in 2009, you legally married Ahmed Nur Saeed Elmi, British citizen entered the United States, and then, according to your own statements, you had no contact with him while legally married. Vance pulled out documents, laying them out methodically. In 2011 and 2017, you filed joint tax returns listing Ahmed Hirsi as your husband. But you were legally married to Ahmed Elmi during some of those years. He looked up. That's not a difference of opinion, Representative. That's either fraud or perjury, depending on which forms you were lying on. These conspiracy theories have been debunked, Omar shouted, but her voice had a desperate edge now. This is racist garbage spread by right-wing. Then answer the questions under oath. Vance's voice cut through her protest. Right now, I'll swear you in. Answer under penalty of perjury. Is Ahmed Elmi your brother? Silence. It's a simple question, Representative. You've been asked it dozens of times. You've never answered it directly. You've called it racist. You've called it Islamophobic. You've called it a conspiracy theory. But you've never just said no. Omar's mouth opened, but no words came out. Here's what we know for certain. Vance picked up another document. Ahmed Elmi's social media posts repeatedly referred to your father as his father. Students who knew him in college believed he was your brother. Immigration records show unusual patterns, and you have never, not once, provided a simple denial under oath. He set down the document. I believe in immigration, Representative. Legal immigration. My wife's family came to this country through the proper channels. They waited. They filled out the forms. They followed the rules. Millions of refugees, including thousands from Somalia, have done the same thing. They waited in camps for years, sometimes decades, hoping for a chance at the American dream. Vance stood, and the simple act of rising seemed to fill the chamber. If these allegations are true, and your refusal to answer them under oath speaks volumes, then you didn't just break the law. You cut in line. You stepped ahead of thousands of Somali refugees who were doing it honestly. People from your own community. People who trusted you to represent them. He walked slowly toward the front of the platform, his voice carrying across the chamber. I grew up poor, Representative. Real poor. Not, we had to cut back poor. We might not eat today poor. I know what it's like to have nothing. I also know what it's like to earn everything you have the hard way. No shortcuts, no gaming the system, just work and sacrifice and playing by the rules. He stopped, looking directly at Omar. You want to lecture America about immigration, while questions about your own immigration remain unanswered. You want to lecture us about corruption while funneling millions to your husband's company? You want to lecture us about bigotry while tweeting anti-Semitic tropes? You want to lecture us about September 11th while dismissing it as some people did something? His voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow it filled the chamber. Representative Omar, you're not a progressive champion. You're not a voice for refugees. You're not a defender of the marginalized. You're a fraud. And the saddest part, the part that should keep you up at night, is that the Somali community that trusted you, that saw you as their voice, that believed you were proof that their sacrifices meant something, they're the ones you've betrayed most. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Omar exploded. You racist, you Islamophobic piece of... She grabbed her papers and hurled them toward Vance, pages scattering across the chamber floor. You will not silence me. You will not silence my voice. This is what white supremacy looks like. This is what happens when black Muslim women dare to speak truth to power. She stormed toward the exit, then whirled back, her face contorted with rage. The people see through you. The people know what you are. History will remember you as a fascist and me as a freedom fighter. Security personnel moved to intercept her as she continued shouting. The cameras caught every moment. The scattered papers, the pointing finger, the tears of rage streaming down her face. The Democrats on her own side looking at the floor, unwilling to meet her eyes or come to her defense. AOC sat frozen in her seat, staring straight ahead. Rashida Tlaib had her head in her hands. Not a single member of the squad rose to defend their colleague. As security escorted Omar from the chamber, still shouting about racism and Islamophobia, Vance simply returned to his chair and sat down. He picked up his pen, made a note on his legal pad, and looked up at the remaining witnesses. "Shall we continue?" he asked mildly. "I believe we were discussing immigration policy." The video hit 80 million views in 48 hours. By the end of the first day, Omar Meltdown was trending in 37 countries. The clip of her throwing papers and screaming about white supremacy became an instant meme, remixed with everything from cartoon sound effects to dramatic movie scores. Conservative media played it on loop. Liberal outlets, after initially trying to frame it as Vance's racist attack provokes emotional response, quietly dropped the story as the full unedited video spread across social media. The full 47 minutes told a story that no amount of spin could change. A calm, methodical presentation of documented evidence met with escalating hysteria and a complete emotional collapse. Even sympathetic viewers struggled to defend the optics. The FEC announced within a week that it was opening a formal investigation into the E Street Group payments. 3 Democratic senators issued carefully worded statements about the importance of transparency in campaign finance without mentioning Omar by name. Her own party leadership went silent. No defense, no condemnation, just a deafening absence of support. The immigration questions proved even more damaging. An investigative journalist who had been working on the Elmi story for years released a comprehensive report within days of the hearing, noting that Omar's refusal to answer under oath had provided new momentum to the investigation. State officials in Minnesota announced they were reviewing certain filings. The Somali American community's response was the most devastating of all. In Minneapolis, community leaders held a press conference outside a local mosque. "We are proud refugees," said an elder who had waited 11 years in a Kenyan camp before being resettled in Minnesota. "We came here the right way. We followed the rules. If Representative Omar did not do the same, she does not speak for us. She speaks only for herself." A young Somali-American woman, a first-generation college student, went viral with her own video response. "My parents waited 8 years, she said, tears streaming down her face. 8 years in a refugee camp with nothing, because they believed in doing things the right way. And now I find out that the woman who was supposed to represent us might have cheated, might have cut in line while my parents suffered. How am I supposed to feel about that?" The squad's response, or lack of it, made headlines of its own. AOC released a brief statement. "I support Ilhan and believe everyone deserves due process. I also believe that public servants should answer reasonable questions about their conduct." It was the most lukewarm defense imaginable. Translated from political speak, it meant, "You're on your own." Rashida Tlaib and Ayanna Pressley issued no statements at all. Omar's initial response was defiant. "I will not be silenced by white supremacist attacks," she tweeted. "The forces of hate want to destroy me because I speak truth to power. I will never stop fighting for my community." But the tweets became less frequent. Press conferences were canceled. Public appearances disappeared from her calendar. Her office issued a statement about focusing on constituent services while she reviewed her options. 2 weeks after the hearing, a poll showed her approval rating in Minnesota's 5th District had dropped 23 points. A primary challenger, a young Somali-American businessman who had arrived in the United States as a child refugee through legal channels, announced his candidacy. His launch video featured a simple message: "I'm running because Minnesota deserves a representative who answers questions instead of throwing tantrums." 3 weeks after the hearing, Vance appeared on a podcast, his first extended interview since the confrontation. "I didn't enjoy that," he said, when asked about the viral moment. "Nobody should enjoy watching someone self-destruct. I grew up with people who self-destructed. My mother, family members, friends. There's nothing fun about it." He paused, gathering his thoughts. But the American people deserve the truth. They deserve representatives who answer questions. They deserve public servants who don't hide behind accusations of racism every time someone asks them to explain their finances or their history. That's not too much to ask. That's the bare minimum. The host asked if he thought Omar would survive politically. "That's up to the people of Minnesota," Vance said. "But I'll say this. The Somali community in Minneapolis is full of remarkable people. People who survived wars, camps, unimaginable hardship. They came here with nothing and built lives through hard work and sacrifice. They deserve a representative who honors that sacrifice, not one who allegedly took shortcuts while they waited in line." The final image came from Minneapolis. 3 weeks after the hearing, in a small Somali restaurant in the Cedar Riverside neighborhood, an old television mounted on the wall played the news. A group of elderly Somali men sat at a corner table drinking tea and watching the coverage of Omar's primary challenger. One of them, a man who had spent 15 years in a refugee camp before finally reaching America, shook his head slowly. "We believed in her," he said in accented English. "We thought she was us, our voice, our success, our proof that the sacrifice was worth it." He took a sip of his tea, his weathered hands wrapped around the cup. Now, I don't know what to believe, but I know this. We came here the right way. We waited. We suffered. We earned our place. If she did not do the same..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Outside the restaurant, a billboard that had once featured Omar's smiling face now displayed a simple message: "Minnesota's 5th District deserves better." Paid for by Somali Americans for accountability. If this story reminded you why accountability matters, hit subscribe and share it with someone who needs to see